Hey guys, so how much better is this? We've actually got 3 guests online and almost audible. We're just having a few techno problems, but how much better it is than last week when we were, 45 minutes late before we sorted it out. But if you watched Robin Ince and Brian Cox back on, when was it, Tuesday? No, further back, Sunday, they had tech problems as well. So, if they can't get it right, we don't feel so bad. Now, tonight, we are dealing with pandemics. Despite the attempt of our guests to derail the subject matter already, and I had to get my gavel out and get them back onto the right topic. So I'm going to introduce them one at a time. We have with us a microbiology technician whose name is Tavian. Hello, Tav.
Hello.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Good.
Under the circumstances, yes.
Yes. Crushed in a tube train of coronavirus sufferers.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Potentially anyway.
Yeah. So you're going to tell us a bit about yourself in a minute.
Yes. Okay.
But first of all, I'm going to just say hello to Richard, who is here from the depths of the West Country.
Good evening.
Richard is joining us from the River Dart, the mouth of the River Dart, and he brings to the table his experience as an orthopedic surgeon, retired, I believe.
Retired from treating patients.
Yes.
But
yes.
Still up to all sorts of mischief.
Yes. Yes. That's the beauty of retirement. We can do our own mischief.
Oh, you guys stop it. You're making me jealous now.
Now, Max, hello, Max, can you hear us? I think Max is still having trouble sorting out his system. So we'll come back to Max when he's managed to get things going a bit better. So, pandemics, the topic of the moment.
Oh, yes.
There's, I wanted to start by asking for some definitions. And unfortunately, Max was the guy.
Max is the epidemiologist.
Yeah, I was hoping that Max would be available to give us his definitions of the important words, as there's quite a lot of new words have cropped up into our vocabulary recently, hasn't there?
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
A year ago, nobody had heard of the expression social distancing or the expression self-isolation. We had the word quarantine.
I've experienced it all my life. Pandemic, there is no agreed definition of that word.
Right.
Okay.
It can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. Depends on context and culture. The World Health Organization is generally regarded as the head honcho for world health, believe it or not, and it's up to them to define whether it's a pandemic or not. They will be influenced by various governments, obviously bigger governments more than smaller, and the bigger governments would probably prefer not to think of it as a pandemic for all sorts of political reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Scientists have a different lobby, and the WHO puts things together, and the WHO or WHO will make a decision as to whether or not it's a pandemic, and then it becomes a pandemic. But really, it's a matter for any individual government or organization to say, well, we're going to define it as a pandemic. All pan means is universal across.
Yes. Yeah, because that's how I understood it, was that if there is an outbreak over a vast area geographically across different continents, and if the outbreak is transmitting within the community, then it's considered to be a pandemic. But obviously, like you said, they've tried very, very hard not to actually, say that word for quite a long time.
It's a naughty word. Nobody wants to say it because it's a
scary word.
A political and economic dimension that is way beyond my pay scale.
It's a political decision, isn't it? And Trump is having great difficulty at the moment.
Oh, but come on. Trump was going to have great difficulty with anything.
Absolutely.
I think.
Sadly.
So I'm just putting in a little ticker. How about this? Oh, look at that.
So any luck with Max, or is he still struggling?
He's gone and come back. So, but he's still not looking as though he's. Wait a minute. Maybe I'll try adding him. Hi, Max. So
he's the right way up, John. Earlier, our other visitors today may not know, but when we were practicing before the show, Max was the wrong way up. So there's progress for you already.
Yeah, so he's the right way up now.
Can you speak, Max? We haven't got your voice is not coming over very well, I'm afraid. So perhaps you need
to do about that.
I can hear you. I can hear him now.
You can hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. You can see my wardrobe in the background. I'm going to have to close
the door. Go get up and shut the door. That's it.
We're very impressed with your wardrobe, Max.
Yeah, marvelous. Yeah, as does best.
So yes, because I'll let John speak anyway.
Yeah, Max, we were going to ask you questions. So can you help us out with these words that are fairly new to the common lexicon? Words like epidemic, pandemic, social distancing, self-isolation. How is it different from quarantine,
Okay, yes, I'll do my best. I'm a long way away from my hands-on work with this stuff. But an epidemic, it basically just means there's a lot of disease in a community. Mm-hmm. And I'm not aware that there's any specific formal definition, but flu, for example, there's a lot of flu about. That's flu. When we get a new strain of flu, which attacks lots of people, that gets called an epidemic. Mm-hmm. Normally, it means a new form of disease in the community which is spreading. A pandemic just means there's that happening in a lot of different countries around the world. Again, there's no formal definition of it. It just means it's happening everywhere. WHO was very reluctant to call this one a pandemic. We suspect there are various political reasons for that, because they desperately work with China. And there's a feeling that China would object. It was felt that they started a pandemic. So they didn't use a pandemic. They worked closely with China, and that word is now in use. That's a judgment from a distance as to how it works, but it appears to be supported by various things. Quarantine basically means that you sit in a room and don't talk to anybody. If you're in a family and one of you gets COVID-19, then actually that's what you're meant to do. You're meant to go to a different room. You're meant to have your meals left at the door. You're meant to have your own bathroom, your own crockery, your own plates. You are literally, as an individual, isolated, quite literally, and trying to have contact with anybody at all. Self-isolation is a process used for people who are at risk of the disease for whatever reason, or might potentially have it, whereby they're keeping their distance from people, and they're staying in their own house with their own family, if you like, and trying to maintain the boundaries outside their own individual family environment. And that's kind of self-isolation, basically means staying at home. And social distancing is for people who don't want to get the disease and don't think they have the disease, which is essentially you stay a long way away from anybody who might conceivably have the disease. People are talking about 2 meters, so that which is where we are now. So you're 2 meters behind people in the queue. If you have to go to the shops, you avoid going out as possible. You avoid going on public transport where you have to sit close to people. My social contact these days involves shouting at my neighbours over the fence, and when I'm walking the dog, shouting at people on the South Downs, making sure no one comes too close. And you wanted, I'm just burbling on. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Quarantine.
So,
quarantine.
The reason for this,
original Latin or Italian use of quaranta, meaning it was
40 yes, 40 days. Yes.
Isolate. I mean, that's why it's quarantine as opposed to tertarine or anything else.
So the reason for this is because it's an infectious disease which is caught from droplets out of other people's noses and mouths, isn't it? Yes. You can't drink it or imbibe it in through your skin or in any other way. You've got to inhale it, haven't you?
As far as we know, inhale it. What would happen if you drank somebody's snot? It's an unlikely scenario.
We're doing a controlled trial on that.
I'm not going to volunteer.
Yeah, neither am I. God, no.
So I hope we haven't put people off their dinner if they're watching and eating. The other thing I was going to say is we are all sufficiently socially distant, aren't we? I think I must be about 6 miles away from you, Max, maybe 50 miles away from you, Tav, and perhaps 100 miles away from you, Richard. That's distance enough, isn't it? We're not going to sneeze on each other.
No, definitely not.
You're just up there on my screen, John.
Oh, right. Oh, it's okay. I'm only breathing in, so you're quite safe.
That's fine, thank you.
The other thing is we've all had to relearn how to wash our hands, haven't we?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think if I wash my hands anymore, my color's gonna come off.
I remember taking a party of school children to, I think it was St. Richard's Hospital in Chichester, and they had a hand washing test. So all the children and me were invited to wash our hands with fluorescent soap. And then we were invited to put our hands into this black box where there was a camera and a light that illuminated the remaining dirt on our hands
properly.
And so that was how we were taught, all the various different parts of hand washing and individual fingers and the nails, all this nonsense. And so that is how we would, and I did best. I was the best at it.
Well done. Well, it's not nonsense if it saves your life.
Absolutely not. In fact, on Skeptics in the Hub, further down on the Facebook page, I've put a little video that somebody provided showing how to do it. They've got gloves on and they're using black soap or a black coloring. And then they're going through all the various motions until all the black is gone, showing you how, the cursory way that we do it ordinarily doesn't really work.
Oh, good.
So I'm hoping that people will be asking us questions in a very short while.
Okay, well, we haven't really introduced ourselves yet, have we?
No, let's do that. Good thinking. Tav, go ahead. You're in microbiology, aren't you?
Yes, my name is Tavian Oladapo. I currently work as an MLA at the Imperial College in the microbiology department. And I also write scientific articles in my spare time. But disease, or should I just say the microbial world, is one of my pet passions. And John knows this very well.
Thank you, Tav.
COVID is a virus and not a bacterium.
Sorry?
It's a shame that COVID is a virus and not a bacterium.
Yes.
Would it? Yes, because then antibiotics would be, if we can find the right ones anyway.
Interestingly, the reason I was going to say about that, the reason that coronaviruses are called coronaviruses is because the viruses are incredibly small. You can't see them really with a light microscope. You have to use an electron microscope. And unless you've got really good resolution, these ones look as though they've got a fuzzy halo around them.
Like a crown.
And it's only when you get really good resolution that you can see that they're little structures like mushrooms covering the surface. So they're called coronaviruses because a corona, a crown, is the original appearance, how they were seen first of all. So, and COVID-19, I believe COVID is, the D is for disease, isn't it? So it's the name for the disease.
The organism is SARS-CoV-2.
Yeah, severe acute respiratory syndrome. Yeah.
That's the
coronavirus 2. Yes.
The organism causes the disease, which is called COVID-19.
Coronavirus infectious disease 19, I think.
Right. Gotcha.
And the introductions, John. The introductions.
Okay,
Sorry.
Richard, can you introduce yourself?
Obviously I've done a lot of reading up about all this because I'm a member of the BMA Council, and we're trying to handle a lot of issues with which I will not bore you this evening. Basically, I'm a retired orthopedic surgeon. As I say, I'm on the council of the BMA and retain my interest in wider medical politics. But I also am interested in alternative medicine, and I'm fascinated by the fact that so many people, a small number, fortunately, but still a number, have some strange beliefs, and that's why I'm connected with humanism and atheism, because it's dealing with beliefs. And alternative medicine is a belief system, a faith. And I speak on the subject. I've written a book, which I know you're all going to buy, called Real Secrets of Alternative Medicine, available from Amazon or cheaply directly. And
I can put that on screen, I think.
Yeah, please do.
Well, he hasn't read it yet, so it's by your bed, John. You won't have read it. And so that's where I am. I'm a member of the Magic Circle, and I know all about fooling people, all about kidding people, taking advantage of them. Except that as a magician, I hope I'm honest enough to admit it is purely for entertainment. I'm afraid that charlatans and quacks generally, tend to want people to believe them absolutely. They want people to believe they really do have special powers or special insight, which is not available to the rest of humanity, and you have to learn to stick pins in people or wave your hands at people in some magic way, etc. You know the scene. So we're dealing with faith systems, and that's why I'm a skeptic. That's why I visit skeptics in the pub and sometimes give talks to anyone who will listen.
Fantastic.
And that's why Richard was going to come and perform and present at the Anti-Theism International Convention, which was scheduled for the first weekend of April here in, well, not quite here, but nearly here in Brighton. And of course, it's another of the victims of COVID-19. Who knows what's going to happen? We're all stuck in our homes. So my apologies to everyone who was hoping to attend that event. And we're determined that it will happen. At the moment, we haven't got a clue when. We need a crystal ball. That's what we need at the moment. So,
well, I had a patient who had a glass eye, and his father had a crystal ball.
Right, and Max, yes.
Hello. Okay, I'm Max. I'm a retired medical consultant in public health. Been in that trade for about 35 years. Finished off looking after immunisations across Surrey and Sussex, and certainly being very active in some of the outbreaks of vaccine-preventable infectious disease. If you live locally, you might be aware of the one that we had up in University of Surrey a couple of years ago. We're heavily involved in that. I was also director of public health down in the West Country for a while, and then for my particular patch was in North Somerset, I was leading the response to the swine flu epidemic in whatever it was, 2009. So that's my kind of general background. I'm generally bullshit and disagree with everybody on principle, which is why I'm a skeptic. And I'm not entirely sure why John asked me to be here, but I appreciate it. I think it's because.
I have to say, Max, I was absolutely over the moon when he said he had an epidemiologist on board, because I certainly wanted to listen to what you had to say. And obviously, under the circumstances, I am pretty sure that a lot of people will be very interested in what you have to say.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Epidemiology is the basic science of medical public health, but I'm not intimately involved with this particular process, and my knowledge is like and many other people from what I've read and applying my previous background and knowledge to what people are saying. So I'm happy to talk, which you can't stop me usually. But please take what I say with your usual skepticism.
Oh, of course. It's just that your expertise will definitely be more than mine, for sure. So this is a learning curve for
I think, yeah.
Okay, guys, can I just take a moment to welcome everybody who is watching and to encourage them to ask questions, because I have the comments coming up here, and if I want to, or if you want me to, I can show them on screen. So, look, for example, this is one comment from John Long. And you can, if you would like to ask a question, please just begin your comment with the letter Q, and then I will post it, and the four of us will address it, or I'll ask the most appropriate person to have a go at addressing it. But Max mentioned immunology, didn't he? Which makes me ask about this. They're hoping to get a test, aren't they, that shows whether a person has antibodies to COVID-19. And the advantage of that, I believe, is if we know who's had it, and we can assume that they won't be able to get it again, so they can't be hosts that are distributing it. Am I right there, guys?
Well, there's a test. There's actually a program going on that I think it started in New York this week, where they're essentially doing that, and they are actually wanting to see whether the people who have had the infection and recovered are actually have got any antibodies, and they're then going to look to harvest those antibodies. And I think it's a therapy called convalescent plasma, and this has actually started this week. And there's actually some data to suggest that I think rhesus macaques have been infected with SARS-CoV-2, and they have actually made antibodies. So we know that this is actually feasible, it's doable.
So the good thing about that is we can stop putting, bring out your dead on their door, and we can say to them, you can go back to work now because you're safe. Mm-hmm. Am I right?
That's essentially a judgment and a hope and a likelihood. Until you've actually been through it, you don't really know that that's the case. I think people are saying it's probably the case that if you've had it, you can't be infected again. But actually, until we've tried and tested, we can't be absolutely sure. In terms of tests, I'm not aware of what you've been talking about, Tavian, in terms of that. But how long do those antibodies actually last? Because when we do,
that was part of the question. Yes,
if you have used for other diseases, you can only use them kind of for immediate work, disappear very quickly. There is a test which is in the news today, of which Matt Hancock has bought about 3.5 million, which will test, I believe, for antibodies in the UK population, which we made available to hospitals for their staff, and apparently also available from your local high street chemist next week for whatever charge you've got, which will tell you if you've had the coronavirus. Of course, that's important to get people, as you say, knowing that they've had it, and hopefully they can go back to work, and that's the basic assumption. But also will give us an idea of how far it's actually already spread in the population. There was a really interesting article which came out of Oxford this week, which, Richard, you might have picked up on, which actually said, based on what we know, there is a hypothesis that actually a lot of the population have already had coronavirus, and that therefore, what's going to happen won't be as long lasting as other models say. I mean, there's a challenge about how useful models are until we actually test them. But once we get a feeling for how many people have coronavirus, we will be able to have a much clearer idea of where we are and a better judgment about what the future is likely to hold.
That's right. We're all in a learning curve here. We can't. Sorry, Richard?
I'm glad we are skeptics because.
Oh, what happened there?
Sorry, I pressed the wrong button. I meant to do that.
Models are models.
Yes.
And we kind of like, as skeptics, we know what that means. It means it's a model. It's not the real thing. Whereas I'm afraid a lot of journalists in interrogating the Prime Minister and other politicians seem to take the concept of a model as being some absolute reality, which of course it is. It's only best guess. It's probability. It's statistics. And of course, politicians don't like statistics because they cannot explain them to the ordinary voter. And it's the voters they're interested in, not the statisticians.
Yes, that is a problem because, as you say, people want certainty.
Yes.
And they don't understand that a model is just what we currently know, and it can be improved.
It's a probability.
Tomorrow we'll know more, and the model will get better. But at the moment, this is the best we've got.
Yes.
So is there anybody amongst us who would like to tackle this question? Look, there is so much negative news about the coronavirus. Does anyone have some positive news stories, such as the huge numbers that have recovered from the virus? Anybody want to take that?
I mean, can I jump in there?
Go ahead.
What we know about coronavirus, and know is perhaps putting it strongly, but that actually the vast majority of people who are infected with it will have a relatively mild disease. We're talking about 80% will have a relatively mild disease who will recover and be absolutely fine. And if that, of the others, a proportion will become quite seriously ill and require hospitalization. So far, that's sounding slightly more serious than flu. Where coronavirus gets its negativity from is that actually a proportion of those people who are seriously ill will die. That proportion, certainly when it started in China, people were thinking that might have been 4%, which is an enormous proportion of people for disease would be very common in the population. Currently, we're thinking that the mortality rate is likely to be about 1%. But actually, that's about 500,000 people dying from this disease in the UK if it spreads very widely. So, and that's why we've got this process to try and save lives. That 1% you have to compare with seasonal flu, where actually it's 10 times as high a mortality rate as we get in seasonal flu. So that's why it's creating so much noise and so much negativity. I mean, the positive news is that actually social distancing does appear to be very protective and does appear to break the to help stop the transmission of the disease and lower the number of people who fall ill, end up in hospital and die. So the positive news is what we're actually doing about it now. But yeah, most people who get it will be fine, but actually that 1% mortality is an awful lot of people of all ages who are going to die.
And in a short period of time, which is the problem, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's the overwhelming of the services, as we've heard. If you've read the stuff about Italy, where basically they're just lining people up in corridors with ventilators, that talk about actually if you have health issues and services are overwhelmed, you might not get a ventilator.
He might not get one.
Healthier. So the kind of challenge of the health service on dealing with those kind of numbers, and we're talking about maybe 2 million people requiring fairly intensive care over a relatively short period of time. They're not everyone's going to get that care, and people will be dying who, if we handle it as well as we can,
they wouldn't. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Toby.
May I ask a question? May I ask Max a question, please?
Go ahead.
I have a question I'm going to answer.
Well, it's a fairly simple one, actually. Now, bearing in mind that pandemics are not a new thing in human history, and also when you consider that notable figures like Bill Gates have been warning us for many years that we're not ready, do you think that this is a wake-up call for us to actually, for the next one, because there'll surely be another one? And more importantly, do you think it's also important, from my point of view anyway, that people need to understand how these spillovers actually occur, that we should educate the public more about how these spillovers actually occur?
I mean, I'm happy to talk to it, but I'm not sure my opinion is necessarily any more valuable than anybody's.
Okay, well, that's fine.
We went through the pandemic in swine flu, about 10 years ago now, and actually that was a lot of noise in the end about something which really wasn't that bad.
No, it wasn't.
The feeling that people have is we've been there before, it's not that bad. And one of the challenges we have is that actually most of the potential pandemics aren't that bad because they're not like this one we're in now. So yes, people have been warning about it. The challenge is, what do you do? I'm not sure people necessarily have known that this is the sort of thing that's likely to come along, that it will require a level of ventilation over and above anything we've ever seen before. And so are you going to have, thousands of ventilators sitting in storage somewhere, and how are you going to manage that process to be ready for it? I think there is something about, could we respond quicker and better? But I think that's a real judgment call. And I'm not entirely sure that the judgments that were made to get us where we are now were the wrong judgments, given all the to be borne in mind. I think that's an arguable point, and only to tell. But I think it's the challenge. Yes, we've known it's coming, and in reality, compared to flu in 2018, for example, in 1918, we were way ahead of the game. But it's until it hits you, you're never sure exactly what it's going to be like.
Sure. Okay, that's true.
Yeah, of course, back in 1918, nobody knew of viruses. So we were very ill prepared. Viruses hadn't been discovered. Now, I wanted to say, too, when you were talking about the numbers, I mean, it's alarming that it's 10 times as lethal as ordinary flu. But at the moment, because we're not doing sufficient testing, we've really got very little idea of the situation. Last week, they were saying that here in West Sussex, there was only 10 confirmed cases. But then underneath, they had in small print, out of a population of 800,000 that haven't been tested. Oh, that's a conversation stopper. I see.
Oh, no. I think we're waiting for you to finish.
Oh, I thought I'd finished. I'm going to put another question up. I'm not sure whether we're.
Well, I mean, I think it's certainly the case that testing, as we've heard in the news, is the way to actually get a true picture of what's going on. So yes, surely. I think that goes without saying that we need to test more people.
Well, the first thing we have to do then is develop the test, don't we? And with a new organism, a new pathogen, that's going to take some time.
Well, I could tell you one thing, though. Obviously, as you know, I work in microbiology. We're basically receiving samples every day. And the volume of samples is getting larger and larger. I mean, I'm literally covered in corona sample bags, so the testing is actually going on. It's just the numbers that we don't really know.
You're obviously one of our heroes, Tav.
I'm too stressed to feel like a hero, I'll tell you that.
So what do you think about, do you have protective equipment? Because there's some people on the news.
Yes, well, sorry, finish your question, please.
Yeah, there's people on the news recently were worried, nurses were worried that they had to go to work, but they were scared that it was because they didn't have the right masks and gloves and things. They were scared that they were exposing themselves to risk.
My colleagues that work in containment level 3 obviously have suitable protection, and I certainly have everything that I need. So I don't think we're worried about that at our end. I don't know what happens when they go to the 9th floor, because that's where they actually do the test, as far as I understand. We only just prepare the samples and then shuttle them upstairs. But I haven't heard any complaints about PPEs from the 9th floor, so who knows?
Does anyone want to have a go at this question here? Well, do we know enough about Vietnam or Sweden to have a stab at that? Anybody?
Can I say a few things?
Sure.
Vietnam is an area where they seem to have very few of the very serious cases and the deaths. Okay. And how they actually did that is less clear than, for example, it is in South Korea. So I will talk about what I know and try and apply it to Vietnam to be helpful. A number of things that places which seem to be more successful have done is essentially test like crazy and start social distancing very, very early on. In South Korea in particular, one of the things that made them very aware and go ahead was the fact that they'd been through SARS. It hit them far worse than it hit us. So the population was primed to respond. As like I said, most recent experience, if you go back to the swine flu epidemic, was felt to be a bit of a damp squib by many people in a kind of casual conversational sense. And SARS barely had an impact over here. It was a big thing in South Korea. I believe it was in Vietnam, but I can't promise that. So you've got a population which are primed and ready to go and much more likely to respond very actively. The other interesting thing about South Korea is if you say social distancing, wear masks, everybody does it. Whereas we know that when Boris says social distancing in the UK, he can't even persuade his own dad to do it. So there's a whole different response to the kind of guidance that comes down. So we're not sure about Vietnam because the work to understand it and the publications from Vietnam to explain it, I'm not aware that they've been around.
Okay.
Scenes. So for South Korea, it's much more clear what they did and how they did it. I don't know about Sweden, I'm afraid, John. Can't help you with that one.
Okay. Well, thanks.
It's also to note it's really odd. Germany, for example, who don't appear to be doing anything particularly different to us, have a very low mortality rate.
Yeah, I noticed that today.
And nobody actually knows why that is. And it's not clear. So I think there's an awful lot of stuff that we'll know about this disease in 10 years' time, hopefully to inform us for the next one, but who knows?
Thank you, Max. That's a very good answer. We've got another question here from Steve, who wants to know, Richard, would you be able to give us some idea on this? Are we going to have to stay locked down until 80% of the population have either had it or been vaccinated against it?
Well, this is the herd immunity argument. Certainly, as a skeptic and concerned about alternative medicine, so many alternative medicine wallahs are anti-vax. Certainly, most homeopaths are anti-vax. And by vax, they mean mainly measles, mumps, rubella, but the principles of vaccination. And they've been against it historically, ever since Jennifer sort of came up with the idea. So there is a great theme running along about people who do not like vaccinations. And we know there's the Wakefield scandal, and there's been films which have been banned because they are misleading and so on. But the herd immunity kicks in. You need about 95% of a population to have MMR vaccine to be sure that a new little baby unvaccinated coming into the community is so highly unlikely to catch anything as it's almost not worth bothering about. Now, Sarah Wollaston, who was my local MP, she was a Conservative, switched a few times and ended up as a Liberal Democrat and lost her seat just now. But she was chair of the Health Select Committee. She was a GP locally until she went to the House. And she had the statistics, and only 94% of patients in the Brixton area were vaccinated. Now, that's good enough to 95 to be okay for herd immunity. Up in Totnes, where they have a different culture, a different attitude, a different approach to life, only 74% of vulnerable infants were vaccinated. And that it's a cultural phenomenon. So when we now talk about the coronavirus, figures I've heard have been around the 60%, and other people say 80%. Once you get to that level for that particular disease, and each disease will have a different level, then you begin to kick in with the herd immunity. You begin to find it more as a virus yourself, if you were one, if you could anthropomorphize that way, you would find it progressively more difficult to find a host, and eventually you yourself, poor little virus,
will die out. Yes.
Those are the principles. I don't think we really do have the figures. So the answer to Steve's question, very perspicacious, is it true we're going to have to remain under lock and key? I think the answer is yes, until we know more about it, because there's no point in suddenly opening the door, stepping outside and being hit in the face by a bunch of viruses that have been just waiting and lurking there. So it's going to be a very difficult decision. We're back to this medical, political, economic decision making. It's darn difficult, and I certainly wouldn't want to be a politician at the present time.
No.
Tav, you want to say?
No. I was just taking note of what Richard was saying, that's all.
Okay, well, this brings me to the early tactic that the government adopted, which has received some criticism. And I understand that it wasn't just the medicos' advice that was being taken into consideration, but also people who understand social behaviors psychology, because if you instigate too fierce a policy, there might be some people who reject it and kick back against it. Whereas if you gradually ramp it up, then it's more likely to be accepted. Is that an indication of what happened, or do you disagree with that?
Well, I understand that was their thinking.
Yep.
But from what I've noticed, especially when you consider the idea of social distancing, the idea that people should stay indoors, a lot of people have actually obeyed the guidelines, but a lot of people have not. We still have cases of people going to outside gyms. The trains are still packed every day, and some of the passengers that I've seen do not look like they're going to work. I mean, I could be presumptuous, I don't know, but I just think that was the thinking, and I think they assumed that maybe if they kind of eased these measures in, people would play along, and I think a majority of people have played along. But I would also say that a significant proportion of people have not.
People, eh? Who have anything to do with them?
Exactly.
Well, can I just comment? The blitz spirit is being invoked in a political dynamic. But the fact of the matter is, modern historians studying facts and figures more carefully and without basking in the emotion post-Second World War, reckon that actually a lot of that was propaganda. People were frightened, people were very naughty, they were misbehaved, they didn't do as they were told and as they should. There was the black market, and things were not quite as has been presented in some programs and discussions about the Blitz. And I think the same thing's happening now. And the behavioral sciences is a relatively new science. You might say it's an oxymoron. It's not a science at all. Certainly it's the least accurate, the least developed. But you have to start somewhere, and you have to try to go somewhere. I think in the fullness of time, we human society, when we're run by AI and robots, we will have a better insight into behavioral sciences, and they'll be able to nudge us. Remember, this was a popular word a few years ago. There was discussions about how you nudge the public. I think that's probably the best way to move public opinion, rather than just be authoritarian, as they are in China or as they are in the Gulf states and so on, where there is an absolute authoritarian government. This is where we bump into politics, because undoubtedly, I'm sure that Boris Johnson has all his life been a libertarian. He does not like the nanny state. And he was very reluctant, more reluctant, I think, than many of his colleagues, to move down the path of the state telling people what to do. And I think this is a genuine reluctance on his part. I'm not going to be critical about him and his personality. That isn't the time for this. But I am saying it's a very difficult emotional and philosophical dynamics which are going on inside our politicians, and they're being tossed around, and they're very, very difficult. But behavioral science, I think, does give a suggestion that most modern people living in a modern Britain take better to a nudge than an authoritarian diktat. Now, they tried that. It does not seem to have worked. So in the light of the experience of the sunny weekend and the crowds in Brighton, which is a place on the south coast where all sorts of funny people live, in the light of that, you know, they've had to switch their policy a bit. They're not going to announce it too loudly, although, of course, they are being questioned on it. But yeah, they've switched policy from nudging to a little bit more directive. And I think when push comes to shove, a directive is necessary. I actually feel better with a directive, and I'm basically at heart a libertarian. But in these particular circumstances, just now for this issue, I'm prepared to be authorized or instructed to behave myself, which is, I think, reasonable in these circumstances.
I agree.
Who'd have thought that Boris Johnson could come up with firm leadership? Anyway, I think before...
Can I just make a couple of other particular comments talking about the early stage? Yes, we did have the nudge approach, and there are examples of where that's been very successful. And we know some of the major companies are very good at nudging us to buy Coca-Cola or chocolate bars or whatever. So it does work. The bit I was surprised at the start of this process, I have to say, was that the nudging and the general advice wasn't followed immediately by essentially a major advertising campaign saying stay at home. And that's the bit that I was surprised at, that there wasn't a major approach to get people to realise the seriousness of this through the use of the media at an earlier stage in the process. And I would have expected that message, even if it was a nudge message, to be even amplified a lot louder, a lot more often, and probably with paid adverts as well, than it appears to have been.
Thank you, Max. On behalf of, not exactly Brighton, I don't live in Brighton, but I know that some of our viewers are in Brighton. I'd like to apologise. I'm sure that our viewers are not all of the weird people who we know live in Brighton. So
we're all weird, aren't we?
I'm digging a deeper hole here, aren't I?
You are. I mean, Edgy was talking about Totnes, and they're not all weird in Totnes either.
No, that's true. Now, the economy is going to be severely hit by this, isn't it?
Yes.
And this is going to mean that most of the manifesto that the government was elected upon won't be able to happen. I mean, what's the chances of the what's it called, the Northern Link, the big railway line, the high speed, that one? What's the chances of that ever being completed now?
HS2.
HS2, yes.
HS2, yeah. Do you think it's gone, or do you think
In abeyance for 5 years?
Yeah, not quite lost, but certainly not in this government, not in this parliament, I should say.
I just think there's going to be so much else going on.
Mm.
Priorities, and I'm afraid it's going to slip down the rankings.
Yes, that probably means the A27 will stay as the road to nowhere too, because that was supposed to be coming up to the high priority. I don't know if any of you know this road who don't live in this part of the world.
I don't.
No. Well, there's a road that dual carriageway heads straight to a little piece of a hill on top of which there's a roundabout. Eventually a tunnel will go under the roundabout.
Oh, okay.
But at the moment, it's the road to nowhere. And it's been like that for 25, 30 years. Anyway.
Okay.
John, I mean, yeah, I think that's trivializing some of the economic impact. And whilst, because I think the challenge that we're facing here is that huge, we basically hit like the great crash in the 20s. And the risk that we're facing, particularly if we have to have social distancing, social isolation, and its impact on the economy for an extended period of time, which seems likely, because some of the modelling, given what we said about modelling, suggests we're going to have to keep this up for the best part of a year before, if you like, we can come out of it, could lead us to something more akin to the Great Depression that in the 30s than cancelling the Northern Powerhouse. So one of the challenges of this whole process, one of the challenges I'm sure for central government, saying if you go down that route, where does it lead you? And what will be the long-term negative effects of that huge slump in the economy? And I think that, much as I hate saying anything that sounds even remotely positive about Donald Trump, he has identified very clearly that actually the economy goes down the trying to think of the route. If the economy plummets very badly and there are significant economic effects, there will be enormous problems with that, which will also result in serious problems. And my anxiety is not that the Northern Link will go, or even the A27 will remain challenging, but that actually there'll be a major disjunction in society caused by a huge depression and enormous problems as people try and get onto their feet over a period of possibly 10 years or more.
Wow.
Oh, yes, that's not a very nice prospect.
That's quite sobering.
And it's worldwide, isn't it? So might there be serious social unrest? Might there be even more attempts to move from poverty-stricken areas to areas which are rather better fed?
Inevitably.
Yeah, relatively.
Oh, I don't like this subject. Should we deal with this question?
Huge downturn. It might do a lot to help with our carbon emissions.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
It might actually end up to be the most positive thing that's happened in the history of humankind. And
It might indeed. It might knock global climate change on the head. Who knows?
Well, isn't there some data to suggest that even in the last sort of couple of months, there's been a downturn in greenhouse emissions?
Yes, there is. Yes.
Yeah, I thought
but
so.
I read that in China, where the satellites have been over, and they noticed a week or so ago, because everything was locked down, that the big cloud of pollution had gone. Now that they're beginning to go back to work, the pollution cloud is coming back. Yes. Tav, this question here on pangolins. It's not right spelt right, but pangolins.
Pangolins. Yeah, that's how I understand the issue with pangolins is that the virus originally jumped from bats, and pangolins are possibly the intermediary hosts. So essentially, what they think happened, as I understand it, is that the virus jumped into bats and then jumped into pangolins, and it actually was from the pangolins that humans got it. Now, I haven't seen any data that actually says we know this for certain, but that is the conjecture at the moment, as far as I know.
Right, and this is something to do with the wet markets in China. Where,
yes, in Wuhan, yes.
Pangolins are a favoured meat of so many people in the Far East. They are a protected species. It's banned meat. It is illegal to trade in it, even in China. But the fact is, for whatever reason, authorities were looking the other way. So this is very embarrassing if true, because the finger then begins to point more firmly at the Chinese meat markets. And of course, I have been to China. I've seen what they eat. It is incredible. And you will have all heard stories, and perhaps you've been there and seen locusts and tortoises grilled, and all sorts of food is available, and much of it perfectly fine. But pangolins is an endangered species, should not be eaten. If it is shown that this is the route, that will embarrass Chinese authorities, who do not like being embarrassed. Interestingly enough, this outbreak of COVID is helping pangolins, because those who previously might have ate it because they think it has all sorts of magic properties. People don't eat just for the protein and the meat. They eat it because it's magic, and it helps with erectile dysfunction and all the other things.
Yes.
So it's one of the alternative things. So, hello, are we there?
Hello.
We can hear you.
I just finished there by saying it actually is helping save the pangolin, because fewer people are daring to eat its meat.
Yeah, and it's not just the meat, though, is it, Richard? You'll know this, because the scales are supposed to have magic potion properties.
Yes. It's rhino horn stuff.
Kind of like rhino horn, yes.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, you might as well eat your own toenail clippings. It's all the same stuff.
It is. Yeah.
It's all keratin. It's all keratin. So if you want to take some keratin, you don't need to kill a rhinoceros or eat a pangolin scale.
Just eat some toenails.
Yeah,
I like that.
Keratin to last a day.
Grow your own.
And then now you wonder why I'm a skeptic.
So there are other zoonotic diseases, aren't there, that have emanated from the same part of the world? Am I right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Max, what do you think? Am I... Sorry?
Well, SARS came out of China, I believe, didn't it?
Yeah. Yes, it did. Yes, it did.
Why, South Korea and possibly Vietnam were very acutely aware of the issue. So yes, but so I wouldn't wish to say any more than that, because it's not an area I know a lot about.
I think it's interesting, though, that the reason when I was speaking to Max earlier about the idea of educating people about what is zoonosis. What do we mean when we talk about a spillover? because I'm quite active on social media, as John knows, and I have to fend off conspiracy theories all the time. It was created by the Chinese, it was created by the Americans, it was created by the Illuminati, and yet the explanation for these spillovers are out there and very, very simple, I think.
So, where are we going with this now?
Okay. Well, sorry, maybe I didn't finish what I was trying to say. Do we think that it is about time that maybe there should be moves put in place to educate people about the natural world, about the microbial world, about how zoonotic pathogens jump, how many we've had in the past? I mean, isn't it the case that we now know that 60 to 70% of diseases that infectious diseases that afflict humans jumped from other animals? I think for me, it's a big deal. It's a big deal that people need to understand what actually happens.
Well, I knew it would come down to the teachers, as usual. We're the ones. I'm an ex-teacher. We're the ones who have to solve all the problems by making sure people know everything they need to know.
We can't. Good job tonight, John.
I'm sorry?
Done a good job tonight.
Thank you. Well, you can't beat education, can you?
No.
That's the solution to a lot of things. So I think we're running out of questions that are coming in here. Let's have a look scroll down the comment bar.
Well, we can always talk about other pandemics, what we know, what we understand about other pandemics. I certainly think it's interesting because what's interesting about this particular issue is that, I agree. We need a public education program concerning epidemiology, because what's happening now is that there's so much misinformation on the internet. So what makes the internet a wonderful tool for learning also makes it a horrendous tool to spread, I'm sorry, gunk. And so I mean, according to them, HIV was created. And if you ask them, well, which strain of HIV, they have no idea that there are many. They don't understand why there are many strains of HIV. If you talk about Ebola, they say the same thing. And then you say, what about Ebola restin? And then you get a blank look. Marburg, most people have never heard of it. Mengele, most people have never heard of it. But they always think it's created. Well, if we teach people about pandemics, if we teach people what happened with the Black Death, if we teach them about Yersinia pestis and we explain to people that this is the natural world, the planet belongs to microbes. It doesn't actually belong to us. You know, we just happen to be here. And these things just generally happen. And it doesn't only happen to humans, it also happens to animals. I mean, if I remember correctly, there's a fungal epidemic that's blighting amphibians at the moment. Millions are dying. Nobody knows anything about that, but this happens.
The frog disease, yes.
Yeah, this happens.
One of the things I had to teach many years ago when I did this for a living was that it's not true to think of us as being well or ill. What would be more true would be to think of us as having a constant battle. When we feel okay, we're winning, and when we feel sick, we're losing. Because there's no such thing. It's not a polarized situation of being always free from disease or ever free from disease. We're always combating it, and people don't understand that.
We are all slowly dying.
Oh yes,
there's a song in there somewhere.
Yeah. Yes, I'm afraid life is a terminal disease.
Yes.
Yeah, but John, is it?
And
sorry, go on.
It's sexually transmitted.
Isn't it the case though that because of our understanding, and obviously I'm going to digress a little bit here, because of the understanding of the natural world given to us by some religions, if you like, we've completely got it wrong. We don't understand the evolutionary arms race in which we all have to engage. Humans are not separate from the natural world, which is why we have battles with viruses and bacteria. Archaea doesn't harm humans as far as we know. So it's an issue that I think just really needs to be addressed. That people need to understand that this is where we are. You know, this is a battle that is going to go on and on and on, and it happens in the natural world. And viruses eat other viruses, and viruses eat bacteria, and so on and so on. I just think, like William said, we do need a public education program.
Definitely. Well, as I said, I think I'm scrolling through the comments, and I think we're coming to the end of the questions that people have asked us. And I think we're beginning to lose some of our audience. So thank you very much, guys. I think
You're welcome.
You've done a great job. And thank you very much for watching, you people at home, self-isolating.
Yes.
See you again next week, because we're going to do this.
And nice to meet you all.
We're going to do this. We're going to do this every week, guys. Every week. Thank you for that, guys.
Thank you. And